Hey everybody, happy Tuesday and welcome to another Techstrong TV broadcast. Today is Tuesday, January 11th, a fantastic day. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm so very excited about today's broadcast. We've got a great lineup of interviews and conversations, and we get things started today with a conversation between Alan and Gunter Ullman, who was the CSO at Devo, and they discuss this year's Devo SOC performance report, which has found crippling levels of disconnect between leadership and staff in enterprise security operations centers. That's not a good thing. Risks and threats continue to rise, and the disconnect seems to be growing. So Gunter and Alan talk about the report results and some of the things that organizations can kind of keep in mind. It's a great conversation. After that, we have a conversation that Alan had at the recent KubeCon Cloud Native Con event in Los Angeles. This is a conversation that he had with Catherine Paganini, who is the co-chair of the CNCF Business Value Subcommittee, as well as head of marketing over at Buoyant, and Jason Morgan, who was the co-chair of the CNCF Business Value Subcommittee, and he's the technical evangelist over at Buoyant. And they talk about democratizing cloud native concepts. So they look at demystifying cloud native concepts, as well as the CNCF cloud native landscape and the new cloud native glossary that they devised. And it is a great conversation. Also offers up a lot of insight into the cloud native space in general. So definitely one worth checking out. After that, we have the Haunted Hacker podcast, and this is part 2 of a 3-part conversation that host Mike Jones has with John Lehman, who is the Senior Director of Veteran Services at Intellectual Point. John's a veteran, obviously, and he talks about so many things related to cybersecurity, including being a veteran transitioning into civilian life. So it is a great, very well-rounded conversation, and definitely one worth checking out. Like I said, this is part 2 of a 3-part conversation. We had part 1 yesterday, and we'll be running the 3rd part on Thursday. So hopefully you can check out all 3 parts. After that, we have our Something Old segment. This is from the recent Innotech Oklahoma City conference that was held in, I believe it was early December, I think, maybe late November. Can't quite remember exactly when, but it was a great one, folks. We have in this Something Old segment, we have a presentation by Walter Hirschkorn, who is the Regional Vice President over at ISG Technologies. He talks about cyber insurance, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So during his presentation, he talks about cyber insurance policies, helping organizations kind of take a closer look at their cyber insurance policy, what they need to know, and what are some of the gotchas maybe. All is designed to help organizations be prepared when the inevitable cyber attack happens. Good stuff there. After that, I'm back with the news headlines for you. Then I have a great conversation with Jay Prassel, who is the CEO and founder at Automox, and we discuss what's ahead for IT operations in 2022, including the expanding roles of managed services providers, or MSPs, to help fill the gaps that so many organizations are finding themselves in, especially with respect to cybersecurity. So Jay and I have a great conversation about all things IT operations related, but with a really heavy emphasis on managed services providers. Great stuff, great conversation there. After that, I've got the webinars preview for you. And then we have The View with Vizard, in which Mike Vizard speaks with Tim Callan, who's the Chief Compliance Officer at Sectigo. And they talk about how to defuse ticking digital certificate time bombs. It's a great conversation. And that is today's lineup of conversations. Every single one is totally worth checking out, so I hope you will stick around for it. We're going to get things kicked off right after these commercial messages. All right. right, welcome back, everybody. We're going to kick off today's Techstrong TV broadcast with a conversation between Alan and Gunter Ullman, who is the Chief Security Officer over at Devo. They discuss Devo's SOC performance report, which found some serious disconnect between leadership and staff when it comes to enterprise security operations teams or operations centers. Threats are continuing to rise and advance unabated, so this disconnect is causing some serious problems with the cybersecurity stance of so many organizations. So Gunter and Alan talk about that disconnect and some of the other findings in the report. It is a great conversation, lots of takeaways. So let's roll it now.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us on another Techstrong TV interview. My guest for this segment is, he needs no introduction to my friends in the security world. It's Gunter Ullman. Gunter is the CSO over at Devo now. Hey Gunter, welcome to Techstrong TV.
Hey, thanks for welcoming.
Pleasure to have you on. You know, being as this is your first interview as CSO at Devo on Techstrong TV, I guess I'm going to have to ask you to do the obligatory, tell our audience a little something about Devo and maybe a little bit of your background, and then we'll jump into the news at hand.
Hey, sure. So, so I guess Devo may not be particularly well known yet, but we're changing that, right? So, Devo comes from a long pedigree of high-speed log analytics, and as you've seen the world evolves, really focusing and tuning into that security need now, and my role at Devo is to drive that security strategy, the research, the innovations there. To solve what I would call the autonomous SOC opportunity, right? Background-wise, I'm fairly new to Devo actually, coming up to 5 months, but previous to that, Chief Security Officer for Microsoft over in the Azure security departments. But before that, as much of the community knows, a couple of decades of I guess being better at the bad guy stuff than the bad guys and catching them at it.
Yep. And I've known of Gunter for many years in the community and can attest to, his reputation and work in there. And so I think Devo really got themselves a terrific CSO here. And look, they've been on a roll, right? They've changed CEOs. They brought in a number of great executives. They've raised it. I think we interviewed the CEO, Mark, I guess it was around Thanksgiving. It was a large round, 150 million or something like that, unicorn status and all that. So, congratulations on joining what looks to be a bit of a rocket ship there, Gunter. It's interesting, I've spoken to Devo and several companies in the log space, including, the Splunks and all of them. And as much as they try to run away from security, right? You could use logging for much more than security. Somehow it always pulls them back in because there's such a powerful use case for security and log data.
I agree. Yeah, I think the change is that, we've sort of seen this evolution of, for compliance sake, I'm going to put all my logs over there and hallelujah, I'm now compliant to it actually costs a bit of money to store logs. So what value can I extract out of them? And I think the part that's changed and what's drawn me to Devo is moving from that paradigm of here's a bunch of logs and you can go mine it and, you measure your ability to extract intelligence out of logs by, coffee breaks or lunch breaks, right? How long it takes to do things. But when the paradigm starts to change where that same type of query takes fractions of a second, or sips of coffee, you can actually start doing much more advanced things, right? And that's where part of the excitement for what we're looking at is bringing in real machine learning, artificial intelligence, and operating at high speed on all the data all the time, right? So brings up some new interesting opportunities, towards that autonomous SOC type space. But as the report that we just put out, looking at the annual review of SOC teams and SOC analysts, there's a lot of problems in the SOC operations that need to be solved, right?
Many of them are not new. Let's be honest, right? When I was at Still Secure 15 years ago, we acquired an MSSP and we opened our SOC, and it really drove home the point to me about why most companies can't do it, right? How hard it really is to operate a 24/7, 365 security operations center. Beyond just the sheer amount of people you need, the communication, the tools, the coordination, the communication it's hard, right? And we were trying to do it, just to give you an idea. Back then we had one down here in Florida and one in the Boulder area, right? So that kind of exponentially increased the complexity, right? Having two different physical locations with it, though you would think not, because it's all, online anyway, but it did. It was a monster. Anyway, this isn't the first year that Devo has done this SOC survey, though, is it?
That's correct, right? It's been for a number of years, and I think there are, there's some interesting things in there, right? If it gets at the highest level, I sort of look at this and say, despite multiple years of doing the survey, things haven't changed particularly, in a positive manner, right? So all those traditional gripes about being overworked, understaffed, flooded by alerts, response times taking too long, not understanding, not providing enough value to the company and to the organization. You would think that, having heard those pretty drastic things, that things would be on improved, but a lot of them are steady states. It seems that these SOC teams, these SOC organizations are living with their lot in life, and I suspect, and I know, there's a high churn of people going through these parts. It's become a bit of a meat grinder, and I think that may sort of be reflected in the difference of opinions between SOC leaders, or SOC leadership, and the folks in the trenches actually fighting the battle inside the SOCs, right? They have quite different views about whether or not their performance and the value they bring to the organizations.
Yep. So Gunther, I sit here, and not to be cynical, right? But after all your years in security, what makes you think it was bound to get better?
Well, I had this argument a lot. I think that, things are getting better. It's just that there is more things to do, right? And so the level of protection, the level of response, the visibility across an organization has increased year on year on year. Right?
Let me be clear.
Yeah.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
Our security has gotten better. I think it's actually much harder to penetrate or hack into organization systems today. I think the technology has improved. I would even say the level of professionalism of the security folks have improved. The level of knowledge, skill sets have improved. At the same time, the attack surface has gotten bigger. The vectors have multiplied. But the lot in life of the security, of the SOC analyst, of the person sitting there, scraping glass, watching for alerts, doing, the day in and day outs. I don't, and if I'm wrong, tell me I'm wrong. I don't think that's improved in a long time, for as long as I remember.
Yeah, I think the role has been changing. There's been an evolution of the role, but the stresses of the job, the demands of the business have remained constant. I think there are some big innovations going on. I think that SOC used to be that starting point for many security professionals, on the defense side. You sort of came in almost like that help desk level, and you triaged events. Frankly, even basic machine learning has solved much of that triaging process. The problem is that even with that triage gives you a 100-fold increase in performance of alerts to ratio of alerts to a human. The attack surface has increased. The number of security tools and technologies out there, and more things are generating alerts, means that even that 100-time multiplier in automation is being swamped by the volume, of new things. I think you've heard it many times, right? Looking at the security industry, and someone invents a better mousetrap, comes along and says, my mousetrap will find 10 new rats that you've never seen before. And your reaction is like, I already have 100 rats that I can't deal with. What's the 10 more that I can't deal with, right? Tell me how I get that down to which is the rat I need to kill now. That's the solution.
And that's always been a quest for the sword, right? We used to, back at Still Secure, we had a product called VAM, Vulnerability Assessment and Management. And I used to love selling it. We used to love selling it. It was a good tool. It showed you vulnerabilities, it helped prioritize. And then, the feedback we got from our customers is that internally they called it a bad news generator, right? Because it would just generate more bad news. That's how they looked at it. Oh, God, we're doing another scan, right? We're going to have another phone book worth of vulnerabilities to grade and prioritizing. And that whole desensitization issue in security, again, is something that, as you mentioned, machine learning has helped with. It's helped with it, but at the same time, the number of alerts have gone up too. So it's...
Yeah. And I think if you look at the SOC teams as well, the SOC responsibilities have changed as well, right? So it used to be very much focused on threat detection, and a level of investigation, and then raise tickets for someone else to go fix, right? Now what you've found is that they also own the policy and compliance, and all of the security posture elements now sort of get wrapped into the same SOC teams. It used to be IT ops and the security ops, and so now you have those teams, those professionals, having to deal with alert fatigue, but now they have to deal with posture fatigue as well, right? So, and I'm sure coming down the pipe is going to be policy fatigue as well.
Absolutely, and we hear a lot lately about this great resignation movement. 4-point-something million people resigned their jobs last month or something like that, and I'm sure a good number of them. Actually, it came out in the survey, right, Gunter? A good number of people in SOCs are looking to get out, change jobs, change careers.
Well, I think looking at the report, right? So, from the report side, about 1,000 different respondents, a mix of leadership of SOC teams, and the folks in the trenches, right? 70% of them all responded back saying that working in a SOC is painful. Right. But I think the key one that I sort of pick out on here really is that 63% of those respondents said that they were considering changing careers and leaving their job. Right. And this survey was completed around September time. I bet that if I was to ask the same question now after the holiday season and dealing with Log4j, that number's probably gone up.
Significantly. I mean, there are a lot of folks who put in a lot of time over the holidays with this Log4j. Look, it's not, all we hear about is the security skills gap, and there's so many open jobs for security. I think we have to come to terms with part of the reason is not just that we don't have enough qualified people, but that in today's world, when you look at opportunities, even within the tech space, there are other paths that are as well compensated or better compensated with a much better work-life balance, with a much better happiness index, if you will, than folks choosing to go down the cybersecurity or, in this case, SOC analyst path.
That's correct. And I think that there's a couple of things that sort of lead into this, and one is obviously there's this increase in the number of alerts, the number of events, and the attack surface we all sort of feel, and we all sort of feel that strain. But when we look at some of the reports, some of the findings there, you find that there's a gap between perception between what the leadership thinks that a SOC team is actually operating at and what they require to do their jobs efficiently versus the folks that are actually down in the trenches, right? So you sort of see this thing of still this mentality of from the leaders, they're having problems, so let's go have more tools. We'll give them more tools, more access to things. Meanwhile, the folks in the trenches are like, time out. I've got more tools than I can ever do. I don't go on training for these tools, and I'm already swamped. And I know myself, I'm not using those tools to the best effects. As a vendor, you should look at that and sort of think, well, actually, how do I integrate these things so that I hate the term single pane of glass because I don't think there's a single human that can operate with just one pane of glass. But I do think that that synergy between getting those different products and technologies actually working seamlessly, and ideally in a way that it solves the problem to a level of, you've done this twice before, so how about I just continue doing this on your behalf, and I'll update you on the successes, and this may be something brand new, but I think it looks like these three different things. This is how you normally operate, dear human. Would you like me to do that for you now? Right? It's almost like the autocomplete that comes to know, love, maybe hate for text messaging and email. But why aren't we applying those same sort of approaches to security?
Agreed. And again, I'm just not amazed or not even surprised. But as someone who's been in the security world a long time, it's frustrating, right? Because once again, leadership will come by and say, look, I just met with a new sales guy from the hot new company, and do I have a magic bullet for you, right? And we've been there, done that. Right?
So sometimes you have to ask bullets. Yeah, sometimes you have to ask whether that magic bullet is aimed at the threat or at the SOC team.
But of course, this is the one. It's aimed at the threat. This is the magic bullet. And, if you are someone who has, been that SOC analyst, been that security administrator for 10, 12, 15 more years, been there, done that. And you got the scars and T-shirts to prove it, right? But let's not be negative, right? Let's not be too cynical. I think we both have said it, and we agree that while the lot in life of the average security person may not have appreciably improved, work-life balance, all that, the level of security that we provide, that most organizations, have today, is appreciably higher than where it was, let's say, in 2005 or 10 years ago, or even 6-7 years ago. Gunter, and we're running low on time. We're actually over time already. But you mentioned this communication gap between leadership and the folks at the single practitioner level, at the contributor level. What always amazes me about that is that, look, for the most part, leadership came from, right? They were promoted from within, or promoted from within the industry, if not from within the organization. Why aren't they more empathetic? Why don't they understand the lot of the security analyst, the SOC analyst?
I think if I had to boil it down, I think there are two attributes, two things that are going this. So one is, it feels like the attack surface has increased so much that they feel that they have lost touch with a lot of the specializations, right? And there's so many different specialized areas. And so they are looking for better tooling to sort of help those teams. And I think there's a misunderstanding there on that sort of skills gap, based on the attack surface there. But the other part, I think, really is that the business demands have changed. It used to be that the security team, the SecOps team, were the policemen. They were the ones that were directing traffic, saying, "Oh my God, you should not do this," and no one really listens to the reasons why. And it was very much, I'll shout from the tree, from the top of the house about, there's a house on fire down the road. But what's changed now is that those leaders have now become more integrated with the business. And so they're having to think in terms of how to position security and the security value into the business, and understand the business security requirements. And so it feels like they've stretched the responsibilities of, being that techie shrill into having to be that business leader for security. And that gap between them and the folks in the trenches had just sort of become broader. And I think that feels like one of the problems here. Unfortunately, I'm not quite sure what the best way of closing that gap is. I think maybe education, understanding, communication is obviously always key, but I think this gap is there, and it seems to be growing.
Yeah, and I will tell you, with so many of us working remotely, I think the opportunity to sort of team build and bind, the supervisors with the analysts and stuff are fewer and far between than they would be, let's say, before COVID. And I hope that would change now till. But you know what, Gunther, we are over time. What about, for people who want to get more information on the survey and read it for themselves, where could they go?
Sure. So through the DEVO website, you'll find some nice big logos and links to the DEVO SOC performance report for 2021. So they're scattered on the website, free for download. And that's
at devo.com, DEVO.com.
Devo.com. That's correct.
Devo. Hey, Gunther, it's great having you on Techstrong TV. Please come back, keep us posted. Let's continue the conversation.
Hey, no, thank you for the invitation, and it's a pleasure as always.
All right. Gunther Ullman, CSO at DEVO, talking about the 2021 SOC survey and some of the key findings of it. Go check it out at devo.com. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back with another guest.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Next up, we have a conversation between Alan and Catherine Paganini and Jason Morgan. This is from the recent KubeCon Cloud Native Con 2021 event in Los Angeles. They discuss the CNCF Cloud Native landscape and the Cloud Native glossary that Catherine and Jason, who both sit on the CNCF Business Value Subcommittee, that subcommittee recently put together, and it's a huge value add for the cloud native environment and population in general. So great stuff there. Let us go ahead and run that conversation now.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, we're back live here at KubeCon in Los Angeles. What a great day we've had, man. I don't know, you two might be like the 15th people I've interviewed today.
Wow.
So really, really happy. But as I said, I'm happy to have live people on after 20 yesterday as well. Let me introduce you here to Catherine Paganini, right? Jason Morgan. Hey. They're both with Buoyant, who are, of course, the people behind Linkerd, right? And if you watch Techstrong TV, you know we usually have William Morgan on from Buoyant talking about Linkerd graduating or other milestones and Buoyant doing it. But believe it or not, though they're both here from Buoyant, we're not really here to talk about Buoyant today, right?
No.
We're here to talk about some CNCF news.
Right.
Both Catherine and Jason are involved. Jason, it's your story. I'm going to let you guys run with it. Tell our audience, What's the news?
Yeah, so just want to be clear, it's Catherine's story more than anything, right? So what happened was about like a year ago. That's about right? So about a year ago, or maybe a year and a half now, Catherine was writing this article series for the New Stack about, you've seen the CNCF landscape, right? And like you look at it, and it's really hard. Like it's just a picture full of these boxes. It's a ton of tech, and it doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense.
People made fun of it on Twitter. We get it,
and for good reason, right? So it's not easy to understand. So Catherine has this pattern where she sees something wrong, and she's let me do the work and fix it, right? And so she started writing the series, and then she asked me if I would help out and do some technical advice, because Catherine and I were friends. We worked on the Kubernetes DC meetup. We were working on setting up a Kubernetes Community Days DC event. And so together we started doing the series, and it was popular. People liked it.
All right, hey, this Catherine's story, Jason, you've done enough. Let me hear it, Catherine.
So basically, at some point we were thinking this is the kind of content that the CNCF should own, right? Because it's breaking down the landscape and kind of, explaining that in simple terms as well, in a way that people that don't have a technical background can also understand. And so we approached the CNCF and said, hey, we would like to do this. And actually, the first thing that we created was the business value subcommittee. So we approached the CNCF and wanted to create that kind of content. So it wasn't right away for the landscape. And we created a business value subcommittee to create content that really kind of explains it in simple terms. We started doing. We wanted to start with the basis, so we started working on a glossary, which was which has been published recently, and since yesterday or 2 days ago, it's now also you can find it through the CNCF page, then the landscape was the next step.
Yeah, it's the thing that launched today. Just stepping back a bit, right? CNCF's nice, and there's all sorts of really neat tech, right? But we wanted to focus on what you can do with it, not what you can do, what whiz-bang tech thing can do, but what can you accomplish in terms of improving your dev process, reducing your costs, whatever it is, right? So that's where we wanted to focus on the business value. And actually, this KubeCon is the second one to have a business value track, right, which came out of that same effort, right?
And which will be now part of the regular CFP process, because it came afterwards. So that's pretty cool, because we think it's time to
mainstream.
Yeah, and it's time to talk about that too. Not only the CNCF is always focused very much on the technical. It started super technical, very technical people, but it's started getting more mainstream. More people are adopting it. You have to explain why people should be adopting it, right? What's the business value behind it. So we're really excited about that as well. And there are some really cool talks going on.
Well, so we got this committee together. We started meeting, and we're talking to each other, and there's 20 different folks on the call, and we're all using terms, but we're not using them in a uniform fashion, right? So it's maybe let's take a step back and just figure out what the words that we say mean. So we decided to start with the most boring task you could take around it, and just define terms. When I say abstraction, what do I mean? What's an API gateway? What's a service mesh? What's a proxy, right? What are all these different components? And so that's come about. We now have 50 terms.
That's the glossary.
That's the glossary, right? So that's the effort, and it's open source. There's a GitHub repo. If you have a term that you either want to find or you want to change the definition you see on the glossary, send in a PR. We'll get added. Once it's completed, it will automatically get added to the CNCF glossary website. So that's nice. And then as you're writing things, if you want to reference a definition, reference the glossary, right? Because it's there and it's authoritative.
I went to law school 100 years ago, obviously undergrad before that. Any reference guide you have, the first thing you always go to if you're a smart student is the glossary, because that's where you want to find a particular item. That's how you get to know what the terminology is, right?
Right.
And even it's always good to have a copy of the glossary nearby when you're reading it, so that you can refer back to a glossary. So it's kind of a no-brainer. Yeah. You ask yourself, why did it take so long for us to come up with this? Let's talk about what you use. Is it like a wiki kind of format that it's in, or
basically. So it's like a very not quite. So it just looks like a normal website when you go view it, but you'll have the ability on each thing to go raise an issue or look at the code.
So there's like wiki-like functionality. Let's call
which will take you back to a Git repo, which has all the terms, and then you write out the definition. If you don't know GitHub and you just want to fix some stuff, you can just raise an issue, let us know. We're happy to like work on it with you. We've got a guide for for marketing folks or for anyone that's not already
Very
technical. How do you just get started and do some basic things like?
What a great idea, man!
Yeah.
Really, it makes you think. Like, why did we wait so long to do that?
Well, yeah, it seemed really important. I hear people arguing about terms. I read like the honeycomb thing where they're like aggressive about what observability means, and I don't mean to be sarcastic. Honeycomb's great.
No. Charity's a friend, and Christina, again.
But so we just wanted to have like an observability definition. Boy, that's a hard one, by the way.
I was just gonna say, do you have it handy?
It's if you go to the glossary /observability, you'll get it, right?
It's funny. I've probably interviewed a dozen observability vendors the last 2 days here, and I try to stay away from religion and politics and observability.
Yeah, religion, politics, and defining observability. Yeah, no.
So, yeah, that's a whole nother story.
Charity, if you're watching, send us a PR. I'd love to, update it.
I hear you.
Yeah.
But, so that's the glossary.
Yeah.
Right.
Now let's talk about, to me, the guide. When I saw that, when it was originally, and look, who am I to say anything, right? I'm just sitting observing, right? Maybe I should be in the observability piece. But anyway, but I'm just sitting here observing, and I see this friggin', kind of giant flow chart that goes on forever.
Yep.
And I'm saying to myself, someone with a little marketing needed to get a hold of this, right? Because these engineers went wild.
Yep.
And how can anyone use? It's
brutal. I used to put it. I used to put it in pitch decks when I was at VMware. We were trying to sell folks like a simplified thing, and we'd put the landscape guide in our slide deck and be like, "Yo, do you want to deal with this, or do you want someone who's just going to hold your hand through the whole thing?" Right? It's really intimidating, and like where I used to make fun of it and use sell stuff. Catherine's like, "Let's make it better," and I was like, "All right, that's a way better idea."
So there's something to be said for someone who says, instead of making fun of it, let's make it better,
right? And that's
what this world needs more of.
Yep.
It's funny. I remember, believe it or not, so I was in cybersecurity for 25 years, right? And we used to have this problem in security, right? Because there was so many different silos and areas. There was endpoint security and network security and web application security, and there was firewalls and intrusion prevent. How did and there was, at the time there were about 1,200 security vendors, and we used to think that really there should have only been 400. Now there's about 3,800 or 4,800 security vendors. I think there should still be about 400, but that's another story. But how do you organize a periodic chart? Right, and we had that in DevOps too. I think it was Zibia Labs, if you remember.
Yep.
We used to have a periodic chart of DevOps. Remember that? And when I saw that original thing, I said, someone needs to do a periodic chart of this to make it more organized, easier for someone to wrap their head around.
Well, the thing is, it started with a few projects, and then it started growing.
It always starts. The road to hell is paved with a few projects. But, and it always does. How did you do it?
Well, we have a guide. So basically, the articles that we wrote for the news stack, we made them into a guide. So you can, now it actually got merged just an hour ago. So you can check it out.
Really? All right. Very cool.
So basically, now there is you can switch between the landscape and the guide. You can see the whole thing, but also within each layer and each category, there are info icons, and if you click on that particular section will open. So if you click on databases, it will tell you what is a database, why you need it. So it's still the same landscape, but you have little helps if you don't understand what it is.
It's organized much better.
Yeah, what is each category?
Annotated.
What is so that's basically it.
And in each section, you've got like buzzwords. So if you're hearing buzzwords, okay, popular projects. What are the CNCF projects? What do the little colors mean? On the boxes. Because there's all these boxes. Some are bigger, some are smaller. They're different colors.
Yeah,
what does that mean?
The gray and white. do you, like, no one knows what, like,
Well, we do
which
now
one?
because we spent like a
Yeah, so
year
what
writing
is-
about it.
Why there was a difference?
Yeah, white means
I
open.
thought it was just
no, white is,
contrast.
I forgot, like, which one is open source and...
So gray is not open source.
yeah.
White is
Oh,
open source.
okay.
Then there's like a very thin highlight if you're a sandbox project, a bigger box if you're an incubating project, and the same
Graduated.
size box with a different color if you're
Yeah,
graduating.
but the sandbox you don't see, you have to click on it, right?
Yeah,
But
you have to click in the
yeah.
section, and there's like this very
But,
hard
so
to
if
see
you
how-
don't know where to look, it's really impossible to know. Like the incubating and graduated, it's the easiest to see. But like the other ones, or like the gray and white box, at some
Yeah,
point
it
we were
is
like,
nuts.
why are some boxes gray and others
I'd looked
white?
at it for a long time and I'd never
hear
even
ya.
bothered. I was like, I don't know, it's just different colors.
It's crazy. So as of like this second, because we're live going out there
Yeah.
right now, it's available on
Yeah,
the
it's-
go to-
CNCF
go to
website.
landscape.cncf.io, and you'll see on the top left now there's a
God's
toggle.
work you're doing, guys. God's work.
Well, we hope it's useful. We
Oh,
thought
I
it was
think
useful,
it is.
so,
I think it's
yeah.
going to be. Look, here's the fact, right? Some people, they only care about, their own private Idaho. If they just work on this, they don't really care about all. They're only on this. Other people like to see the landscape and how it all fits in.
Right.
I always tell people this, even in my own company, right? Is you got to understand what the whole sausage factory looks like, not just your little job in the factory. If you're really going to kind of put it together, right? So like there's a book called The Goal, which Phoenix Project is based on, right? It's about manufacturing, but it's
Right.
about bottlenecks and all that. If all you're concentrated on is this little bottleneck, and you one day solve that bottleneck, and then lo and behold, you just find out there's another bottleneck right over here.
Right.
I mean, did you really solve anything, right? You just exchanged one bottleneck for the next. You got to look at the whole system, right? That whole, not to get into Deming and all that stuff, but that's what you're looking at. But this is great. I mean, congratulations to you both. One of the nice things, frankly, about Boyne, and speaking to William, is that you guys have the opportunity to do this at the company. There are companies that say, hey, is that going to create revenue? Tie this to revenue, right? If it's not tied to revenue.
Well, we actually do it on our spare time, so that's our hobby.
Do you?
Yes, we
It's
do.
your hobby.
Yeah, in the mornings before work.
You know what? That's what makes the world go
Yeah,
round. So
yeah.
good for you guys.
Yeah.
Excellent.
we
That
enjoy
being
doing
said, Boyne is very supportive
Yeah.
of us
Well, yeah,
doing
yeah, but
constructive things in the ecosystem.
No, they're good players. They're
Yeah.
good
Yeah.
eggs, man. Good stuff. Congratulations and thank you to you both.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks
thank
for
you.
coming
Thanks for
on and
having us,
telling
yeah.
us about
Yeah,
it as
no
well.
problem.
All right. We're going to take a quick break. We're here in LA live for KubeCon. We'll be right back.
ContainerJournal.com is the leading online destination for centralized computing-related content. ContainerJournal.com covers all aspects of software containers, from container management, data management for containers, container security, networking for containers, to the entire container ecosystem, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, and more. ContainerJournal.com has the largest selection of container-related news, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.containerjournal.com to learn more.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Next up, we've got the Haunted Hacker podcast. This is part 2 of a 3-part conversation. Host Mike Jones is speaking with John Lehman, who is the Senior Director of Veteran Services at Intellectual Point. John, who is a veteran himself, talks with Mike, who is also a veteran, about transitioning to civilian life. They also talk about politics, science, artificial intelligence, the federal government, and so much more. It's a great conversation with a lot of interesting points. So let's go ahead and roll it now.
Right. I think it was after the fall of the USSR, and all of the scientists and mathematicians and computer scientists didn't have any jobs. Right. The first thing that happened was criminal groups started forming. And that's where we have a lot of those ransomware gangs, a lot of those hackers now. they're being funded and trained by old scientists that lost their jobs when Russia fell. I think we're going to see that a lot in other countries too.
Well, there's prior to me leaving the Army, I was in JSOC and dealing with NBC type of situations, and there was a lot of different trainings. They went to Aberdeen Proving Grounds and all this other stuff to learn about nuke, chemical, and biological agents and how they have effect on the body, and dealing specifically with the way that the Russian state has developed their chemical warfare program and their biological program. And there's a guy named Ken Allebeck. He actually lives in, I think, DC now, and he's a chemical engineer for a company in DC. But when he originally came through the United States, and they told him how much a scientist can make in the United States versus how much he was making in the USSR at that time, he was like, well, how do I become a contractor and work in the United States? So now that's exactly what he does. And it's good to see that he's able to make a living here. But we also have to understand that there's a lot of people that are taking those skills and those traits, and they are hired out by other nation states for deleterious action. And the more that we start to buckle down on the idea of how to kind of flesh out who's who within academia, and, you know, and this is my personal opinion, if we were to use OSINT to its fullest skills, or to its fullest, what we would do is start decoding a lot of the Russian and Chinese materials, and then find out who's who in the index, in the bibliographies, and then we find out who influenced those people, and then find out where their geographic locations are, and we will start to figure out who's who within this infrastructure that's trying to undo. Because I guarantee you, if we go back and we look at the underpinnings of who's who in the bibliographies of some of these books that have to do with computer science, and you start dealing with, you know, some things aren't open source, like a lot of the court documents within Russia are not open source documents like they are in the United States. You know, that you have to be part of the state to have access to those, whereas in the United States, it's not like that. You can get on Pacer, you can get on one of these other websites and find out criminal activity. But if we were to look at that and kind of flesh that out with both Chinese, Russian, Iranian, you know, you throw the threat actor in there. I mean, there's a lot of threat actors that are coming out of the Philippines right now too, you know, that have links to Abu Sayyaf. So, you know, you pick your flavor, you pick your day, and then you pick how you want to what cone to put that flavor in, I guess.
Yeah, but you also run into the problem too, and we do it here in the U.S. as well. You know, I just filed an FOIA on myself some time back to the FBI, and I literally got back in less words, no comment, no comment. So those types of requests for information, you know, they tend to treat a little bit different, but like street crime, you know, you can definitely pull that stuff up pretty easily on some of the county court clerks' websites and do searches like that. Right. But when it comes to like the secret agencies like the CIA, the FBI, it's almost impossible. I have a good friend, Robert Hansen, that filed his FOIA, and they came back, and you're supposed to get some kind of return within a year, a result from your investigation or your request. And he didn't get a full result, so he called, and they said, "Well, you know, let me do some looking and researching." And CIA came back, and FBI came back and said, "Look, you know, there's 3 different categories, and let's just call them, you know, small, medium, and large." And they told Robert, yours is an extra large, so it's going to take some time. And so my question to him was like, so while they're taking that time, Do you need to continuously file FOIAs to see if anything else has been opened up? Like, the whole system here is so convoluted and diluted and bullshit. Like, there's no real way to find out information about yourself and what information they're holding on to. And with the KGB, I mean, when you look at the way the USSR fell, and now it's being ran typically by the KGB. I mean, Putin's a former. Well, I say former. Nothing's really former, but he's part of the KGB. They do have a secret type of government. I got approached by a company out of Moscow not too long ago, about a year ago, almost a year to the day, and they were a security company, cybersecurity, and did pen tests, and they were wanting to extend their market into the U.S. And I thought, I don't know about this. I rarely get approached by people from Moscow to do work. So I started doing some OSINT, found out the guy, at one point, the CEO had worked for the government in economy. So, I mean, there's a couple things that raised red flags, and there's a couple things that didn't. I talked to some of those guys that he worked with that were pen testers. Their knowledge was legit. But it was still kind of like on the edge of being shady, So I still entertained the conversation, went along with it, and I wouldn't mind doing a pen test for him. Although I think if I do, I'll probably end up in prison. But it was really interesting to see how they operate. And when you talk about some of these people that have been in the bibliographies of these books, computer science, we did the same thing. We do the same thing here in the U.S. when it comes to looking for the root of something, right? Unfortunately, our government likes to do it to each other. And when we did that against the Clintons, we found out that they had Marxist, ideals and influences from their college days. And that's what they truly believed in, was Marxism. And that didn't go over very well when it hit the public. But I mean, our country is such a mess right now, politically, organizationally, financially, health. I mean, it's a complete disaster. I remember when I left for Europe, before I got exiled for a couple of years, this country wasn't the same as it is now. And when I came back, I didn't even recognize this country. People were just acting just absurd and storming the Capitol on January 6th. Like, I don't know what happened in the 2 years that I was gone, but all hell has broken loose. And so, to be fair, they're trying to do the right thing, but I don't think the amount, you mentioned this, the amount of honesty and people being genuine from the government side to the people, I don't think that's there. And I don't think we're ever going to get that back. I had a phone call today. We were talking about this. I had a client that the FBI contacted and said, hey, look, you're on a ransomware hit list. And that's all they would tell them. Wouldn't tell them who the threat actor was. Wouldn't tell them their method of operation or the vulnerabilities that they look for to get in. Wouldn't tell them anything. And I thought, that's kind of bullshit, because they know, and that they obviously have the list. So they know which group it is. And by that, if I just had a group name, I could tell you what vulnerabilities they exploit and their method of operation and what servers are going to go after for first. So here we are trying to prepare this customer for potentially being compromised and losing a lot of money. And the FBI is sitting on information that they won't give people in the industry. And it kind of pisses me off, because it goes back to, it's a one-way street, and it shouldn't be that way. If I'm a CEO of a company and they have knowledge that I'm going to get compromised, I have a right to that. I think as a citizen, as a business owner, I should be able to get that information to protect myself. By showing up and saying, hey, you're going to get attacked, good luck. It's basically like, fuck you. We're not helping you, but by the way, you're about to get your ass handed to you. And I think, I talked about this on an interview in Oklahoma City with Techstrong, is that we're not going to change the FBI's mentality. We're not going to change the way the government works. They work in secrecy and they work behind curtains. But we have to produce a framework so that by chance they decide to give us that kind of pertinent information, we have a way to filter it in, some kind of framework, some way to get it to where it needs to be within the industry. And I think as an industry, we need to quit being so quiet when it comes to being breached. I always tell people some of my best success is understanding some of my biggest failures. And by companies exposing themselves, saying, "Hey, this is why we got breached. This is how we got breached, and we fucked up." That makes the whole industry better because nobody's going to make that same mistake again. But again, if the FBI doesn't filter that information to the people who need it, we're all fucked. And I think we need that government level, that military level of intelligence and, drive and full speed ahead to go after that type of shit. And I think it's going to get to a point in the industry where we do have groups like JSOC, more like a cyber JSOC that goes after and gets what we need and bypasses government bullshit.
Well, yes, I agree with you on a lot of that, on a lot of it. A lot of Americans don't realize that there's a lot of non-for-profits that are run in this country that operate very similar to intelligence agencies. Southern Poverty Law Center is one of them, and they particularly deal with extremists and hate crime and things like this. But and not to go on this whole Orwellian 1984 trip.
Oh, we're past that. We're past that already.
But I think what is going on now is groups of people are starting to get together that are like-minded. And you see this, on Quora, you see this on Reddit, you see this on, even on Facebook, Wastebook. And you'll probably end up seeing it in, Meta or wherever else. But, back in the day, it was chat rooms and people that would get together that liked, MMA or liked computing. You get into a particular chat room and then you would talk on a thread about how to do X, Y, or Z.
Right.
But, things have come full circle. And, with the advent of COVID going on, there's these small pockets of people and it's what they are. They're small pockets of people. They're people that are like-minded, that are continuously throwing ideas around in a way that is creative, incisive. And I think it can be very beneficial if these entities or these groups started working together in a way where if you are part of a hacking group, so to speak, and you don't have to be a black hat hacker, but you can be somebody that has hacking skills. And if you see something and you say, hey, this is a trend that I've seen, they should be able to come to you and say, hey, Mike, this is something that I've seen. Have you seen this? And you'll be like, no, I haven't seen this. Or, yeah, actually, I've seen this before. And, sharing intel in a way between different citizens can mean a huge difference. We've seen this with, Symantec and some of the ways that they were breaking down some malware a couple of years ago, and they had to bring in other folks to assist them to break down exactly what that malware looked like.
In the underground, we have like hacking groups. They do share intel. Matter of fact, we share exploits and we share, targets, in the underground. There's forums dedicated to selling these targets. Right. And people communicate and barter with each other. It's a whole economy. It's a whole civilization underground, right? And where I think the people on the other side of the fence fail is they keep dividing people. They keep division going because they know that if they create division, then that's less power they have to deal with. They're so worried about themselves that they fail to see that everybody else is struggling.
Right. Now, it's really cool that you state this because there's some stuff that John McAfee said that's absolutely insane. The guy was just off the chain most of the time.
Yeah.
But he said a couple of things that really was absolutely insightful. And a lot of it has to deal with culture and how we deal with ourselves within a cultural context and how we're going to apply ourselves inside and outside of our cultural contexts. And what you're talking about is a cultural context. So if you have these people that are on this side of the house and they feel that they're in the intelligence community and they're siloed, and there's the FBI and they're siloed, and then you have the ATF and they're siloed, and here's the U.S. Marshals and they're siloed. And you can't have that between interagencies. You know, I was just speaking to a firefighter, and this is just a firefighter, and I was asking him about joint exercises between him and the sheriffs and the police departments and everything else. And he said, you know, we were trying to do a vehicle rescue, and, you know, they were just retrieving dummies, but they were going to use the jaws of life and do everything else to get the person out of the vehicle, so that way they could get some of the newer firefighters trained on this.
Right.
And they said it was just terribly difficult because the sheriffs and the police department and the state troopers were all involved, and they all were arguing on who was going to take the lead. And I looked at them and I said, well, who was in charge of the FEMA and running the aspects of emergency management through FEMA? I go, each of you guys should have had that. He goes, we were. I go, then you should have taken the lead. He was like, that's what we said. But they didn't want a firefighter to be in the lead. They wanted somebody that had a gun and a badge to be in lead. So it's a lot of this political red tape that you run into. And on the political side of the house, it's not even like you had mentioned a couple of things earlier. And the only thing I wanted to do was like grab America by the ears and scream in its face term limits on every senator and congressman. You know, right. I personally don't feel, and this is my personal opinion, so take it for what it's worth. I don't think that a congressman and or senator should be in a position for more than that of a president. So no more than 4 years. And I don't think anybody that's a judge, and this goes for any judge. Yes, I'm speaking to you, the ones that are of the bar. You shouldn't be in there for more than a year.
Yeah, I totally agree.
And the reason why I say that is because, you know, you get embedded in these positions, and then there's no change because there's a specific mindset, and then there's no way of getting away from it because now you're embedded with it.
Yeah, and then you have to spend the next 8 years changing the way things have been done.
All right, welcome back. Next up, we've got our Something Old segment. This is from the recent InnoTech OKC Oklahoma City event. This was a one-day conference that we had in the I believe it was early December, and had lots and lots of great conversations, including a presentation by Walter Horsecorn, who is the Regional Vice President for ISG Technologies. He gave a talk titled Cyber Insurance, the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, going over all things that organizations need to consider with their cyber insurance policies so that they can be prepared when the inevitable attack occurs. It was a great presentation and tons of takeaways, so definitely want to check this one out. Let's roll it now.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming today. I'm going to talk a little bit about cyber insurance. It's a big topic today. We'll talk about some trends, things to look out for as you go through your hunt for cyber insurance, what you can do prior to the policy application, post application, if you will, and of course what we refer to, and I'm not an insurance professional, I'll preface that, actually work in the industry, and the reason we're doing this is to help educate the industry around insurance policies, right? So, and we'll talk about some of the gotchas in the policies that you just don't know until, kind of the saying, you don't know until you know, right? So I come to you from ISG Technology, regional provider. The reason I'm here today is we tend to work in cyber breach remediation on a regular basis. And insurance is one of the topics that comes up. So who needs insurance? Kind of the state of the insurance industry, what it means to the business, and then looking into the future, what does it really mean from an insurance perspective? And hopefully when you leave, you'll have a better understanding of the landscape in cyber insurance. So cyber insurance. I know we have a home audience and I can't see the hands, but in this room I can. Of the people in attendance, how many people in this room have a current cyber insurance policy? So a little bit more than maybe half, right around there. Okay. Again, next question. It's important to understand. We're talking, how many of you have that policy? Or let me take that back. How many of you were participated in the acquisition of that policy, meaning you were part of the selection committee? So about half of the ones that had policies. So it's important to know. How many of you are responsible for the IT infrastructure inside the company? Okay, so good to know. So let's talk about why people get cyber insurance, what that does, and where the industry is seeing claims rising from right now today. Right, you'll see top three. I highlighted business interruption, including supply chain attack. Big deal, supply chain attack right now. But the one that's interesting that was never on the chart until this year was pandemic or health issue. And the reason that it even made the chart, if you see in 2020, it was 3% of the claims, pandemic, health issue. This year it rocketed to 40%. The reason for that is the remote workers. Remote workers caused the vast majority of breaches. And it wasn't even the remote worker. It was the fact that a worker was remote. So looking at it a little differently, right? So like I said, and then cyber incidences, right? Cyber crime targeted, supply chain attacks, those sorts of things all kind of fall into this black hole of we couldn't identify what it was. So it's a cyber incident. We don't know. I expect to see pandemic drop off after 2021, assuming I think we're getting there, right? I think 2020 taught us all a lesson in both IT and in insurance. The true risk that was there, that wasn't there in 2018. Does anybody know when the first breach actually happened? Like, we talk about this myth, ransomware breaches. Anybody know when the first one really happened? I'm sorry? It's in the 80s. 1988, yeah. That's actually the first breach. So this is not new stuff. It's just more advanced and more global. But what that tells you, right? I mean, these things are all taking a disruptive and halted production. We know what happens in ransomware. The wheels come off the train. Everybody runs down the hall screaming, what do we do? What do we do? And somebody comes out of the room, kind of like with the golden ticket and says, we have cyber insurance. And nobody knows what that means. And they don't know who to call. They don't know what the steps are. And 90% of the time, it's our experience, our clients do not know what that policy covers. It is discovered upon the day that you report that as a claim. Suddenly that claim payout becomes real. What's this thing going to pay for? And that's what's important to understand. We'll talk a lot about that. We talk about target, right? I was going to ask this question, who thinks they're a target? The easier question is, and the easier answer is, who isn't a target? That's the easier answer to this question today. Who isn't a target?
A guy that goes off grid, that lives in Colorado in a cabin, that cuts their own firewood, hunts their own food, and grows their own vegetables. That is not a target. Everybody else, if any sort of digital profile, is a target. And even if you don't think you have a digital profile, you do. Because somebody entered your data into a computer system somewhere. You know, I heard something disturbing yesterday. I'm not sure, it's not new. Facebook has this thing, it's called shadow IDs. So even though you're not a Facebook user, there's an ID reserved for you with your name. Right? They collect that data and they're like, oh, John Smith. Well, John might want to join Facebook. We better have a profile for him. And they'll collect data from everywhere, right? That's what cyber criminals do. They collect data. And we don't know what the cost is. The cost is the ransomware and what it costs to pay out. But what's it cost to fix? Conservative numbers. I'm going to guess, from what I see in Oklahoma, we fall between 200 and 300 employee businesses on a regular basis throughout the state. And, you know, when you get to the 250 to plus, right, the field narrows. So the vast majority of people that have businesses in Oklahoma fall in that 50 to 250 range. You're looking at minimally $184,000 to remediate a breach. I pulled that number off a cyber study. I went and talked to our team that does this just to validate this. Is that a real number? That's actually a really good, accurate number. They told me, yeah, Walter, about $200,000 and about 10 days of downtime is what they have as results. So the analysts aren't wrong, because they're pulling information from everywhere. So we always say, well, who says that's been in the network for 266 days? Who has that number? How do I know, right? Collecting data. So why purchase cyber insurance? Number one reason that we see, and it trues here, is risk transfer. Are you familiar with risk transfer, what that is? You're transferring the risk. You're assuming that you're paying somebody to take that risk. So cyber insurance became a mushroom cloud industry between 2018 and 2020. In 2018-17, there were less than 50 providers out there doing this. Today, there's over 100, more than 100 actually, providing these services. Main driver was risk transfer. The number one reason to not get cyber insurance, number one reason, is risk transfer. That is a cop-out that CFOs make because they do not want to make the investment in the tools that IT professionals need to properly manage a network. They actually go hand in hand. You need the right tools and you need the right assurances that if something does go wrong, because we know they say it's not if, it's when. You need the right backing to support you financially to survive a breach, right? So risk transfer, even though that is the motivating cause for most of these entities to do this, is not the right reason. That really means if you've been going to your CFO or CIO or whoever you have to go to, I need to go get an EDR solution. I need to go implement multi-factor authentication. Walter, is that thing where you have to get a 6-digit number and type it in? That's what it is. Yeah, we don't want to do that. That's very inconvenient for me. I'm the CEO. I don't want to be bothered. Don't take me off Windows 7. I like the way things are. I'm sure you've all heard that. The second reason, why do people get cyber insurance? If you look at the first four categories, results from an independent company's cybersecurity risk assessment. So a bunch of people are like, hey, we should see where we're at. Right? Remember, a lot of these are publicly traded companies that have to do it for the exchanges. That's why that's a big number. They didn't have to do that. They wouldn't. The next reasons, reaction to cyber attack, reaction to cyber attack, reaction to cyber attack. I'm getting insurance because I've been attacked. We should look at it. It's a little late. Your premiums are going to be high. It's kind of like the guy that has 5 DUIs and goes out and says, I need car insurance. Well, it's $9,000 a month, right? That's the same thing on cyber insurance. Here's the trend, and this is actually a scary trend. take it back to 2020, the cyber insurance policy industry was about $7 billion in revenues. By 2026, it's going to be about $27 billion. Good time to change your career and sell cyber insurance. It is a jettison industry. The challenge with industries that grow up so quickly like this is as quick as they grow, they implode just as fast. And you're starting to see that now. Just read a report yesterday. Cybercrime losses have exceeded cybercrime policies, meaning premiums. So the insurance companies have paid out more than they took it in premiums. It's an insurance company in business for, to make money. So what are you starting to see? You're starting to see the insured companies exit the market. We're no longer going to renew your policy. Your policy premium just went up by 27%. Right? By the way, that is the last 90-day increase rate. So that was a 90-day increase from the end of June to October 30th. In cyber insurance rates went up on average 27%. Depending on the client, could go up even more, right? Depending on your industry. Big trend, big growth. So the chain reaction, so we're talking about, right? Here we go. Cyber Scoop just came out. Costs are piling up. Yeah, no surprise, because nobody's doing anything to prevent cybercrime. CFOs won't give money to IT professionals. They think it's a bother. They got insurance to shift the risk. Surprise, guys. The premium policy looked great when you wrote the policy. You were so excited. You know, we signed up another insured, and it's this $100,000 a year policy until they get hit with a breach. Their policy is a $3 million policy, and you just paid out $3 million, right? That's the challenge. So ransomware is on the rise. Lack of profitability, the reaction, and uncertainty. That's what we're talking about. What's the uncertainty? Will they pay on my policy? This has gotten to be the biggest sticking point out there today. And there are all kinds of claims now today where insurance providers are finding reasons to not pay on your claim. Right? So here we go, the cost. This is why. Insurance companies are designed to pay out as little as possible, as quickly as possible, and move along. And depending on the policy and the insured, I either cancel you or I raise your premiums. And there's a whole guy in a back room with an abacus figuring that thing out. $20 billion by 2021, excuse me, cost $20 billion. And it accounts for more than 3/4 of all the claims that are out there, ransomware, right? Easy way to deliver it. That's a scary number. Has anybody in here filed an insurance claim for cyber? Just curious. You have. How was your experience? Gotcha. Yeah, so that was painless. Can I ask how many people are in your company? Users, yeah, knowledge-based workers. Yeah, you have a lot of tools too. Lots of tools. So that's the reason, right? There's somebody that had an incident, had tools, and yes, again, they go hand in hand. One should not replace the other. You shouldn't have a lot of tools and not be getting cyber insurance, and you shouldn't have cyber insurance and not invest in tools. Right? It's like getting car insurance and not learning how to drive, but drive the car. We talked about this, the loss ratio and the claims, right? And we talk about this because where this really goes is when you start to apply for policies today. A year ago, it was really, do you have a pulse? Do you have a network? Do you have a firewall? It's really what the criteria was about a year ago. Today, I collect, it's not a hobby, I collect so that I can help educate you guys insurance applications for cyber insurance. Because I would like to see what insurance companies are asking their clients and potential clients to fill out. I think it's amazing. This was like a one-page thing a year ago. It was nothing. Today, it's a fairly detailed 30 questionnaire, and it's not even that detailed, but it's going into what are you doing with your email? Is it backed up? Are you using multi-factor authentication? Are you using encryption? Is your backup? Are they domain attached? Is your data encrypted? Is your email encrypted in flight? It's going through all kinds of assessment tools and things because they are now saying, wait a second, if you're not protected, do you have antivirus? Right? Who doesn't have antivirus? It's a question on there. Right? What are you doing for authentication? Well, how is your network? Are you using user authentication controls? Somebody managing this? Do you have log review? The last time I heard that was when we were doing a risk assessment for a customer. Right? So I have some good friends in the industry, and I called that work in the insurance industry. I said, hey, what's happening? Oh, the next new Walter is we're going to start requiring a formal risk assessment before we start issuing policies. A formal risk assessment for you to get a policy. Right? So a year ago, you could just walk up and sign up just like anybody else. And here in the next probably 6 months, you'll start to see, if it hasn't already started, we will be asking for a full-on risk assessment. It's based on the size of your company, by the way, and the policy size. So if you're asking for anything, I would recommend, if anybody in here has any kind of business of any size, ask for $1 million policy and then scale up. Obviously, higher ed, the policy's much bigger, but any normal business, you should have at least $1 million in coverage, and we'll go into why that number should be there. We talked about that. We talked about the premium changes. Here's the hockey stick. You see it? Q2 2020. Everybody started to wake up at the end of 2020. Hey, this is really happening. Beginning of this last year, lots of breaches, lots of patch management breaches. We learned as a business who doesn't do patch management. It's kind of fun. You talk to clients, oh, we do patch management. Uh-huh. Hey, we got a problem with our Exchange server. Really? Did you do patch management? Because there was a patch for that. So, critical piece of what you do. It's just not tools. It's actually doing things. If you don't have patch management, please go find a provider that'll do it for you. Particularly right now with the hardware and chip shortage. You're not going to get a new server, you're not going to get a new switch, and you're not going to get a new router anytime soon. So what you have is what you have, so you have to make it last. If you get hacked, even if you have insurance, and the insurance pays to replace your equipment, you can't get it. So if you've got a router that's trashed, a server that's burned, hard drives are encrypted, can't find new equipment. We're seeing lead times now into April, May, and June. Or go with a cloud strategy and find a cloud provider that can spin up stuff in the cloud for you, because that's another strategy you can take. All right, let's talk about these policies real quick. First party policy, most common policy, right? I'm a first party. We're going to investigate. We're going to help. We're going to do this. We're going to pay the ransomware if we feel like we should, even though it's against federal law to do that. Anything and everything to get out of this claim, right? It's a very basic policy. And we'll talk about what you want to know in that policy a little bit later. Liability, though, is important. These are other policies. So we always think first party. I've got cyber insurance. Okay, do you have liability? What do you mean? Do you have contractors touching your network? Could your network infect somebody else's network? Can they come back on you, right? EDI is a big one where there's data being transferred between, I've seen networks where customers do Dropbox shares with contractors. A contractor drops a file into Dropbox. Contractors have been on a home network. They picked up a bug because they clicked a link on a YouTube video or whatever the case is, and it drops into a network. The liability protects you as a business, for future claims and litigation. It's important to know. Most people miss that and they get sued. And then they think, why me? Why me? I didn't do it. Unfortunately, you did. It was your network. And the last one doesn't apply very much here, but if you are an errors and omissions or E&O, if you're a technology provider of any sorts, you need to provide that. It's very common in software applications to have E&O liability insurance. very common. In the manufacturing space, you'll have E&O. If you're not that type of person, it's not relevant to this. But you definitely, if you've got a cyber policy, you want to ask the questions. If you weren't part of the discussion with your CFO or CIO or whoever made that decision, go ask them. What's our policy cover, and does it cover liability? In higher ed, for example, I know your networks touch a lot of other networks. It's the way higher ed works. Guarantee you there's a liability policy. Guarantee you for them. And there's a question on the other side. If you're touching my network, what do you have in place for if I get breached? If you get breached, how am I covered? That's going to become a thing of the future, where we're going to start interviewing contractors for what their security practices are. And we're going to say, do you have cyber insurance? And do you have liability? If you get hit and I talk to your network because that's how we do business and that transfers to my network, how do you cover me? Do you remember we talked about supply chain being the top one? That's how supply chain happens. I find the weakest link in the supply chain and I attack that link and I propagate all the way up. And in case what we just went through earlier this year, it was automotive. It was a massive breach, global breach. It did not start at the manufacturer. It started at a very, very small tool and die shop. Minimum standards. We talked about what they ask, right? And this slide might be out of date, and I apologize. But PCs are equipped with AV, right? Antivirus, and it's up to date. You got a firewall, right? These are the old criteria, I guess. You back up regularly. Really, it's back up regularly. How do you back up? Is it off domain? Do you archive it at a certain point? Are you keeping monthly, quarterly, annual backups, right? Because if you're breached, you have to have a point of recovery. And the only way you know that point of recovery is if you can go back to the last backup that's clean. If you take the math that people talk about I just heard in a previous session, 144 days are in your network. These are all things that are come out in the wash when you file a cyber insurance claim. So it's best you be educated on it. You need to know where you can go back to. What's your safe point of recovery? And you need to know it quickly. Managing user permissions, and one of the most inexpensive things that any business can do is employ MFA, or multi-factor authentication. And when I say that, I've been in organizations that are very large, and I talked to them and I said, do you have MFA? Oh yeah. Well, kind of. Then you don't have MFA. You can't kind of have MFA. When you fill out an insurance application, they are clearly yes, no answers, and there's no explanation. There's like, please describe. Nobody cares. It's either a yes or no answer when you're talking about cyber insurance. Remember, this is all going to get inputted into a system, and it's a scoring system. It's like your credit report. Your oldest line of credit is 25 years, right? You have paid all your bills on time, right? So it all goes into a scoring system. All those things play. The more yeses you check on an application, the lower your premiums, the less at risk. Doesn't mean you're not at risk, just the less at risk you are. What to look for in a policy. I know some of you have policies, so you can hold my feet to the fire on this, but typically what we see out there, make sure your policy covers forensics. Why is that important? You can have a policy that doesn't cover forensics, but for the policy to pay out, you need to provide forensics. A forensics audit on a small business will run you about $20,000 to $25,000. It's not a small business. On a large business, you're going to tip the scales at 6 digits. That takes quite a bit to get that figured out. Does it cover any legal expense that you may incur? Legal expense could be notifications to agencies, different things. Notifications. We all know, TJ Maxx, in last June, I'm letting you know today, last June we were breached, right? There's laws. Those notifications cost money. Penalties, if PCI and HIPAA hold teeth, some of the financial industries hold teeth. I've recently started to see HIPAA actually use those teeth. They didn't before. They were kind of like, oh, you're bad. Now they're like, yeah, that's a big number for us to tell you not to do that again. And now you're on the audit list. We're going to be out there every 60 days making sure. Credit monitoring and ID theft. Now, this is an interesting topic because this has been around forever. Do you want to make sure that this is in your policy? I debate this. If your end user is the consumer and you have a brand, you want this in your policy. If you don't have a brand that's, I wake up and I'm like, oh, Cheerios, I remember that's breakfast food, right? Then don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. That's not that important. Credit monitoring is not that important. But if you have a brand, that is critical because you're going to have to notify all those people that utilize your brand. It's going to come out. If you have a brand, public relations is important. If you're a higher ed or a university, that's super important. If you're a business that's known in the industry, if you're a bigger employer in the marketplace, that's a big deal. If you're Tom's Fish and Tackle, it's not a big deal. And the last one is liability defense costs. So we talked about the liability policy, right? And that does happen. Customers who get breached and their breach impacts other users do sue. They sue for punitive losses to their business. Not all policies are built the same, so I want to talk about this. So you have your policy, and what you really want to know is if you have your policy, what happens when you execute on it? The most important piece of feedback I've picked up from multiple clients over the years is we want to be sure that we can use our trusted partner. So most companies have one or two or maybe three IT partners that they trust. They know their network, they understand the business, they know what drives the business, and they're typically regularly talking to that entity on a regular basis, once a month, once a quarter, whatever the math is. That's what they want because they know if they get breached, they don't have to re-educate somebody that says, hey, this is how this works, this is who talks to this. They already know it. So the speed of restitution or resolution is expedited. So you want to make sure that you have the ability and the flexibility to use who you want. When it relates to getting your systems up, you want to make sure in insurance, there are two terms. There's reconstruction, right, and remediation. They're two different things. Remediation is we'll fix your breach, we'll stop the bleeding, and we will bring you back to where you were a second before you were breached. That's remediation. You are not in a better state at any point in that. You're just coming out like I just put a fender on your car, right? Oh, you wanted it painted. No, we said we'd put a fender. We didn't say we'd paint it blue like your car. It's a red fender. What you want to make sure is that they provide the funds to replace your equipment. So remember we talked earlier about switches, routers, servers, all that? Forgetting about the shortage that we have right now. If your hard drives are encrypted, they're encrypted. They're done. You're pulling them out of the rack and you're saying goodbye. That has historically been what we've seen on 90% of our breaches, is that not only do they take data, create disruption to your network, they destroy your network, because those are the reasons people do breaches. There's financial gain and there's destructive reasons. Excuse me. And you want to make sure, and you want to exercise and find out the payouts. You want to understand those payouts. Do they pay for lost production time? There are policies out there that if you have a business and you say you have a lot of salaried workers and you're breached, salary gets paid salary. So my office is down for a week. None of my staff can work. We're still cutting a check on the 15th, right? You want to make sure your insurance can cover those gaps for you so you're not taking the financial hit for those salaries. So understand what those are. A lot of Q&A, a lot of insurance policies out there. It's not a simple task of let's call Joe and find a broker anymore. I call it the bad. I don't know if it's a bad or it's a difficult. Policies that dictate providers and the actions you take. Now, this varies by organization. It just does. Depending on the size and scope of your organization, that may or may not fit your business model. It's our experience it doesn't. That's really going to be in the mid-market enterprise, not large enterprise, but mid-market, small to medium enterprise. Their focus initially is going to be on forensics because they want that statistical data. The reason they want that is to make sure that they're paying out on a claim properly. They're not going to deploy any resources until they know It's a valid breach, and it wasn't caused by negligence or any other clause in the policy. And I talk about that because that can really slow things down. Remember, by the time you discover it's a breach, they've been in your network. By the time you file the claim, you can assume 24 hours before anything happens. So you've already lost a day. The second day you'll lose because nobody's acting on it because everybody's thinking about the insurance. And so about the third day, they'll have somebody deploying resources for forensics to you. And then you're kind of at that. And usually by 10th day, you might get somebody on site to really get systems. And it depends on what your agreement is. And then the ugly part is you think you're covered. You think you've got some things and didn't understand the gotchas, which is why I say as IT folks, you need to understand what those gotchas are. Because remember, when you have a breach, they pull the covers back. So all the stuff you told them you had, they're going to know. So if you said you had MFA, if you said you didn't have any Windows 7, if you said you did patch management, all that dirty laundry gets aired at that minute. And if they discover that you didn't have that, you falsified the application, your policy is void, we'll refund your premium, and thanks. It's scary, right? Employee negligence is one of the newer ones that they're calling a non-insurable. They're saying, oh no, that's negligence on your employee. He was supposed to do that day and he didn't. Is it negligent or is it human error? We're just working Johnny to death because nobody wants to put money into IT, so he has to work all these hours. But the most recent one that I've seen, and I think this is interesting, kind of spooky too. Claims being denied for acts of war. So any ransomware attack or breach that they can tie back to a state-funded or state-sponsored attack are being denied due to act of war. So you have to take that. Now, that's debatable if it's an act of war, see, because is it really an act of war? What I've seen is most of those go to litigation and court. We try to get a court date lately. You know, for litigation, it's tough to get that. Watch those gotchas. I wanted to talk about some of the providers that are out there and that I would pay special attention to. Again, we don't provide this insurance, but we do work with these companies because we're on the other side of the table trying to figure out how this is going to work for the customer. I will tell you, in my experience, and the team's experience, Chubb, Travelers, and Beasley's are the standout leaders in cyber insurance policy providers. And I say that not because they're big. Yeah, they're big. I say that because they actually do have their client at the forefront. They're thinking about their insured. Let us know what you need to do to get them back up and running. Heard that over and over again. Please keep good records. That's the one thing we hear. Would you guys mind documenting your remediation for us, showing us what this is all about? Blah, blah, blah. Those are the best ones. This is a boring slide. We're not going to talk about that. What should you do? Review your current insurance policy. We talked about that. Go back, find out. Understand it. If you have questions, ask the questions, because the day you need to exercise the claim is not the day to be asking the questions. That's the worst possible moment. Right? If you don't, how many people in here do not have cyber insurance? I just don't have it. 1, 2. If you don't, I think you should start shopping for it. I really do. These are not monstrous premiums that you think. I know we talk about 27%. It's all based on the size of your business. It's all based on your network infrastructure. It's a lot of factors. If you need help, reach out to a partner. Ask them, what does it need to look like so I score well on the application process? Best business practices is do a risk assessment. We recommend that. I recommend that. It's really not tied to cyber insurance. It's tied to job security, frankly. If you do a risk assessment, and you can go find a provider out there. I know they exist. I know firsthand. You can go get a cyber assessment, a risk assessment, done very quickly at little to no cost, and have a great discussion with your leadership team and say, here's where we're at. Here's where we're at. You'll have a scoring metric. You'll have all kinds of great data. We'll show you. People will show you. I say we do those. But we'll show you, and people should show you, where your holes are and what it takes to fix them. You show up for a policy for cyber insurance with a risk assessment that looks clean, they're going to welcome you with open arms. Right? They're going to be very happy. That assessment also helps you strengthen your posture and security. It helps you build a roadmap for the future. You know, security layers on. I'm going to say 7-8 years ago, you just needed a really good firewall. And now you're adding device authentication, user authentication. You know, I'm trying to understand what VPN tunnel you're coming in. I'm segmenting you. I've got my network so segmented, and I'm managing my GPO like nobody's business. And it didn't used to be that way, and it is, and it's sad. And it makes your lives complicated. Who changed the policy? Why does everybody in accounting suddenly have access to the general ledger? Or everybody in sales have access to the general ledger? We changed the policy, right? Who's managing that? What's the audit trail? All those are pieces of where over time we've let those things get to that point because they weren't that important. They're getting that important now. Your incident response plan. I think I mentioned we do a lot of incident response. The number one plan that customers have for incident response, if they have cyber insurance, is call my insurance company. It's a terrible plan. It's a terrible plan. It should be part of your plan. But who's on your IR team? Who are those key players? Who do they need to be? Based on the size of your organization, do you need marketing? Do you need PR? Do you need finance, right? Do you need the CEO, CFO, IT director, IT guys, right? Who are these people? Maybe you have key vendors, right? Maybe you're a Cisco shop or an HP shop. I need to have a vendor on this list because if I get breached, I need to know more. Maybe you have firewalls, Meraki, or Fortinet, whatever the case is. I need a hotline to somebody to help me. You need to have that plan in place. You need to have it documented. And most importantly, you need to actually test it, right? You need to put it in play. All those things stack on top of each other when you're looking at cyber insurance. So when you're looking at the rates of cyber insurance and you're looking at the things you want to do, if you will just take a simple step back and say, what makes this more secure? Do you know why people don't really hack banks? You know why? Their network is so complex, it's not attractive to a hacker. And the only reason they might get hacked is because they forgot patch management. But most banks and financial institutions have outsourced patch management. They have all these rudimentary functions that are really crummy to do. Nobody wants to sit in front of a screen and watch patches run. They source it. There's a reason. It has to get done, and it's unattractive to approach a facility that has that much. It's the difference between driving up to a castle that has a 40-foot wall, and they say climb the wall, and a castle that has no wall. I'm going to drive right in, right? That's how hackers work. We think it's targeted. Those are far and few between, actually. What's targeted is I know that Meraki didn't update a certain something. I'm going to take a chance at seeing how many people. Microsoft publishes 25% of all Microsoft users do not ever update anything in Microsoft. They never patch. So if I'm a hacker, I got a 1 in 4 chance of hitting somebody, right? These are all the things that insurance companies look at. What makes you less risky for me? So what you'll start seeing is if that list of insurance companies I showed you, you'll start seeing that list getting smaller. You will start seeing the Chubbs, the Beasleys, the Travelers, Liberty Mutuals are in there. You'll see some foreign. I would recommend staying away from offshore cyber insurance providers, personally. It's 2 reasons. 1, they're difficult to work with. 2, there's a time difference. And if you're breached and you're in Oklahoma, for example, or anywhere, if you're central United States, it's a 6-hour time difference, 5-hour time difference. Most of them are in London. There's about a 5-hour time difference. So when you're walking into the office, they're going to lunch. When you're going to lunch, they're going home, right? And so that makes for a very difficult conversation when something is critical to you and you're leaving a message over and over and over again, and nobody's returning your call because when they're at work, you're at home. It's very difficult. Any questions? You are. It's not prevalent yet. Part of it is underwriting. And so insurance companies try to do a couple things. I want to keep my underwriting cost as low as possible, but understand the risk as best I can. And now you're talking about an industry that's growing exponentially. So I'm not built for the underwriting volume that's coming in today. I can scale it, but I don't get the experience that I had with the people that have been doing it. Now I'm fast tracking people to learn about risk. So what's the best way to not do that? AI tools, right? Risk assessment tools, which is good and bad. Again, black and white, and you may score a worse score because maybe some setting was off in your network and you didn't know it. Which is why I always say, do a risk assessment first before you go down the path of a policy, even a renewal. You'll start seeing on renewals, they'll start asking for risk assessments now. In order for us to renew your policy, we would need to see a risk assessment. That's a great question, though, and that's AI is getting very popular in that space.
So many ways to configure. I would probably answer it the same way. Yeah, sort of. But what we're really saying is configure in a certain way to allow some convenience for you. So you're going to take that. What's the taking into account what is considered?
Critical systems is typically what they're looking at. CRMs, financial. I need to access my accounting system, right? That system has the ability to do wire transfers. Is that MFA? Is everybody in accounting have to multi-factor authenticate? Does everybody in accounting have to device authenticate, right? Is this the MAC ID assigned to Walter? And is Walter got his phone? And did Walter get the ID? And now we know it's Walter and it's his computer. And oh, by the way, he's working from home because we can identify that network too, right? He's VPNing it.
So there's a little bit of trust around in terms of you don't have to authenticate every single time for a certain number of days if you're coming from the same address, coming from the same.
No, you have to authenticate. I mean, for MFA to work properly, you authenticate every time. Every time you log into that system. That's why I said you either do or you don't, right? So we see, oh, the CEO doesn't have it because he hates it. Well, then you don't have multi-factor because most major breaches actually start at an innocent level with a C-class employee that clicks something. It's my high school buddy, right? Sending me something on Gmail on a funny video, and it's not your high school buddy because you've been social engineered. They figured it out, and he's sending you a video, and actually it's an executable that you just launched on your laptop. And the second you hit the network, I'm going to launch the executable. Every time. MFA is like, yes or no. Encryption is like, yes or no. It's very, very cut and dry. And I know that's what makes being in IT very difficult because you're juggling user satisfaction against business principles and needs. One of the things, if it's helpful to anybody, one of the things that's always useful is to create an IT committee or a user committee of multiple groups, departments, some ad hoc committee that you meet once a quarter or whatever. So you can get advocates in every department. You can advocate in accounting, advocate in sales, right? Those guys, sales and marketing, they're pain, right? They want access to everything. They want BYOD. They don't want to be tagged. Engineering. If you get a representative from all of those groups together once a quarter and talk about IT and security and what's important to your world and ask for their input and how is this going, you will find that the acceptance inside your organization will grow drastically across the organization. Most organizations are like, oh, it's a change IT's making. I hate that change. So, piece of advice. Any other questions? I think we're at the end of our time. If not, thank you all for attending.
Hey everybody, happy Tuesday. This is Charlene O'Hanlon and I'm here now with the headlines. First on DevOps.com is an article that looks at using event-driven architecture with microservices. Microservices architecture is on the rise, already forming a key part of several current transformation projects, breaking down traditionally monolithic applications into self-contained, independently deployed services that are identified using domain-driven design. Microservices hold the potential for enhanced scalability, flexibility, and durability, and the time taken to deploy and maintain components has improved significantly. But this isn't the case for all microservices architectures. Ecosystem integration challenges and weak distribution processes are but two of the major impediments to microservices. This article details how event-driven architecture can solve many of the issues around utilizing microservices to enable developers to build highly scalable, accessible, robust, and versatile systems that can digest and aggregate exceptionally large amounts of events and information in real time. And we look at how organizations can use automation to enable multi-cloud networking. As cloud technology continues to advance, networking components are becoming more complex and distributed across multiple groups. Multi-cloud networking brings new challenges around connecting and managing across dispersed environments comprised of public and private clouds, as well as physical data centers. Organizations must unify their network operations in a way that enhances their capabilities into a new level of skill and efficiency. Automation can help smoothen the transition to new technologies by simplifying manual processes and bridging the plethora of systems in hybrid IT environments for easier management. There are a number of other benefits as well, which are outlined in this article, as well as some tips for organizations to consider. As more organizations move forward with cloud modernization, automation can help mitigate and manage the challenges that come with multi-cloud networking, bolstering skill efficiency for long-term business impact. In news, Intel has updated its One API toolkit through which it makes processor extensions accessible to DevOps teams. The toolkit is a collection of APIs that Intel created for x86, GPUs, ASICs, field programmable gate arrays, and other classes of processors. The goal of the updated toolkit is to make it easier for DevOps teams to expose extensions to any company's processors in the runtimes developers use. The One API 2022 toolkit adds additional capabilities, including the world's first unified compiler implementing C++, SYCL or SYCL, and Fortran, data parallel Python for CPUs and GPUs, advanced accelerator performance modeling and tuning, and performance acceleration for artificial intelligence, and ray tracing visualization workloads. There have been 900 new and enhanced features available via the One API toolkit in the last year, including deeper Microsoft Visual Studio Code integration, support for Microsoft Visual Studio 2022, and Microsoft WSL2 for Linux development on Windows. All right, over on Container Journal, Solo.io has launched an open source project it calls Bumblebee, which makes it easier for developers to take advantage of extended Berkeley packet filter technologies that run within the kernel of an operating system. The company developed Bumblebee to automatically generate the boilerplate user space code that is required to access eBPF technologies running at the kernel level. Bumblebee includes a command line interface that automatically generates the user space code for eBPF programs by automatically exposing maps as logs, metrics, and histograms. Solo.io is using that code to add additional functionality to its open source Istio service mesh for integrating APIs running on Kubernetes clusters. Other organizations, however, can employ the same boilerplate code to invoke eBPF technologies as they see fit, as Bumblebee is packaged as a container that complies with the Open Container Image specification. Over on Security Boulevard, we have the latest on word from New York Attorney General Letitia James that 17 companies and 1.1 million online accounts have been compromised by cyber attacks involving credential stuffing. The OAG's office published the Business Guide for Credential Stuffing Attacks, which described how its investigation, details on the attacks, and how, through automated attempts using usernames and passwords nicked from other online services, the attackers tried to gain access to online accounts. In light of the growing threat of credential stuffing, the OAG launched an investigation to identify businesses and consumers impacted by this attack vector. Over a period of several months, the OAG monitored several online communities dedicated to credential stuffing. It found thousands of posts that contained customer login credentials that attackers had tested in a credential stuffing attack and confirmed could be used to access customer accounts at websites or on apps. From these posts, the OAG compiled credentials to compromised accounts at 17 well-known online retailers, restaurant chains, and food delivery services. In all, the OAG collected credentials for more than 1.1 million customer accounts, all of which appeared to have been compromised in credential stuffing attacks. And finally, we look at the supply chain security. A supply chain attack allows cybercriminals to maximize the damage they cause by attacking not just one or two victims, but one company that has connections to hundreds of other companies. That's why organizations need to know who their suppliers are and what kind of access they have to the organization's data and networks. This article offers up some tips to help companies understand how a supply chain can impact their security and how they can better protect their networks and data from any potential supply chain attacks. All right, that's it for the headlines. Please check back with me on Thursday. I'll have a fresh new batch for you. Until then, I hope everybody has a great day, and please, whatever you do, stay safe.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Techstrong TV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with Jay Prassel, who is the CEO and founder of AutoMox. Jay, thank you so much for getting on the Zoom with me and having a conversation today. I do appreciate it.
You bet. Great to be here, Charlene. Thanks for sharing your morning with me.
Yeah, well, it's a new year, new things going on, so hopefully it's going to be much better than 2021. And in that vein, wanted to talk to you a little bit about some of the things that you guys are seeing with AutoMox and maybe some of your kind of future-looking ideas. And I know in previous conversations that we've been going back and forth. One of the things that you guys are looking at is kind of the rise of the MSPs to kind of fill the gap that IT operations teams are really going to be witnessing or experiencing this year as the result of whatever, the Great Resignation, the expanded digital transformation efforts of organizations, what have you. So let's talk a little bit about that. But first, before we do, why don't you tell us a little bit about AutoMox, because not everybody may be familiar with you.
Sure. So to give you a feel for AutoMox, we are a cloud-native IT ops platform by design. This is a SaaS-based platform that we deliver to the market, and it's really focused on two specific things. One, as you can imagine, we're really focused on modernizing the IT systems management space writ large. So there's a lot of legacy players here that require on-premise systems to be brought on servers, et cetera, just to run their infrastructure. We've moved entirely away from that with a cloud native platform. But in addition to kind of modernizing the space, we're really looking really to deeply change the way IT operators actually do their work. And we feel we can affect that change by really increasing the efficiency in which these teams operate, but also raising the confidence of how they execute that work. If you think about an IT operator today, it is a tough job. I mean, these people are asked to track and maintain thousands of systems, in many cases across the world with our customers. These systems are across Windows, Mac, and Linux operating systems. And they're not only everywhere, but they're now in your home, right? So the operational complexity here has just gotten massive. And the result of which we see something interesting in our customers, and I'll kind of guide you on this, just a quick little journey here, is that when we go into big companies, we see security teams that are very modern, using some really great cloud native tools, like CrowdStrike is a good example. And they produce a lot of information for IT operations teams to act on. The problem is when you go to this IT operation team and ask them, what tools are you using? How are you going about this? Their answer is mixed, varied, and distraught in a lot of ways. These IT teams have different systems for Windows, Mac, Linux machines. Pushing software requires different tools, compliance, a whole set of different tools. So this operational complexity is high. I think COVID and other things have raised it to the point where we're going to break the camel's back here pretty soon. And we're seeing kind of folks like MSPs come to the table to start to solve for that. Because at the end of the day, if you're operationally too complex and you're unable to affect change quickly and efficiently on these systems, basically you're inefficient. Mm-hmm. The net of all of that is an ultimate stance of being just insecure. You can't act on the information that these modern, EDR tools are giving you. So you're left in this really tough spot, right? That you can't act on this information fast enough. You are insecure. And it brings us back home to this idea that, more security tools don't make you more secure. Yeah. It's just not the case. You have to be able to act. And that's where Automox really comes into play.
Yeah, well, that's a great point. It's, you can throw all the technology in the world at a problem, but unless you've got, unless you understand what the problem is in the first place, you're never really going to be able to solve it. So getting to the root of things, I think, is fundamental, I think, in any successful organization in general, but in IT specifically, especially as it pertains to security.
You got it.
So we're talking about managed services providers and some of the benefits that they can offer organizations. We've been talking about managed services providers, in the IT channel for going on 20 years now. Right. So, do you think we've kind of reached a critical mass at this point where they're actually become not kind of a nice to have to help an organization, but more of a, that trusted partner, if you will, for organizations?
I think it has to do with company size. I mean, as we were talking kind of before we got taping here, the idea that these, when Amazon and those came on in the early days, it was people thought, the MSP will go away, the local folks will go away. And I think we did see a dip there, but I think we also have seen the resurgence of them now. And I think they are here to stay without question. I mean, you see the numbers of them are significant. The specialization is significant. And I'm with you. And we see the same thing with a lot of our customers, especially in the mid-market, and even into the enterprise space, that these customers are leaning on MSPs to solve some of this operational complexity. Mm-hmm. Some of them are running CrowdStrike. They are also then, let's say, bringing Automox to the table, combining those two in a kind of better together style situation. The other thing that is happening here is I think MSPs are able to move a bit faster than corporations. They've done all the homework. They've put the cloud native platform tools in place that allow them to reach into literally people's homes now to help manage these systems and do so at a really greater effectiveness than they have in the past. So we're pretty bullish on them, especially as we head into 22.
Do you think that organizations are also kind of now understanding at a greater depth what MSPs can do for them? I'm thinking specifically about organizations that are maybe they've got part of their cybersecurity footprint right, and they do it really well, but they're still kind of falling down in certain areas. And now, as we're hearing more about software supply chain issues, and the increase in ransomware and all of the other cyber threats that are out there now, do you think they're going to start looking at managed services providers, not only for maybe infrastructure or just kind of IT operations type things, but also moving more deeper into the cybersecurity realm as, say, managed security services providers?
Yeah. I think we see a lot of companies offering these kind of managed security services. You see companies like Red Canary and others being pretty successful here. What we've seen start to change in the MSP world is people are willing to, or the MSPs have been willing to kind of look and manage these systems, but sometimes when it comes down to the actual change on the system itself, they would outsource that or push it back to the customer themselves. I think we're finding that MSPs being a little bit bolder now, and companies asking them, can you just handle the soup to nuts, like actually make the change, and they establish the parameters for the MSP to make sure that they are kind of operating within bounds that meet the requirements of the company. But one of the things we are seeing too here with some of these MSPs is we're seeing them abdicate legacy tools. I mean, you think of up till literally the last few years, they have been working with systems that require on-premise infrastructure, and that requires something that happens at the customer site. This is kind of very old school at this stage of the game, at least from our perspective. And with what Automox is doing by delivering kind of a zero infrastructure platform to this MSP, they can now touch all endpoints, cloud, client machines, VMs, anything that's got an operating system on it, and they can touch it almost instantly. So the time to go from a new customer going, hey, I'm here, I need you to help me solve this problem, to actually solving it is dramatically reduced now with Automox in the picture, because all it is the deployment of an agent. There's no infrastructure. In the fact that we have something I think very unique in the space. If an MSP is using a tool like CrowdStrike or Rapid7 or SentinelOne, Automox is actually highly integrated into these security tools. This is something you don't find in any of the IT operations space. And one thing that I think is worth really highlighting, this deep integration into these tools allows us to pick up intelligent feeds from these security players and actually automate the action on the other side. So we find security folks love what we do because they go over to their brethren across the aisle in IT ops and say, hey, this platform talks to CrowdStrike. It talks to Rapid7 and the things that I use and care about. Why don't we join together? And what we see now is another trend happening here we expect to see across more of in 22 is the confluence of these two roles coming closer together.
Well, that'll be interesting. So do you think that we're going to get to a point where there really kind of is no demarcation, if you will, between what an IT environment does, with organization and MSPs?
Entirely. I think if you look at certain customer sizes, mid-market, you certainly see those two coming together almost out of necessity. In larger corporations, I think there's still value in their independence. You get a little fox in the hen house issue, and I think there's a bit of the mental framework of if it's not broken, don't fix it. Right. This is a problem in the IT operations space that Automox, through our tooling, we think can help them change that stance. So I think in larger companies, they come closer together. I think a key part of that is the tooling tie-in. In the old days, or up until now, it's been, go work in your 7 systems. Good luck to you. And why haven't you made the change that I've required from a security standpoint? I think now we can start to close the loop a lot more and a lot more closely. It's one of the powerful things about having, some real security veterans within the Automox board and ecosystem. The founder of CrowdStrike sits with us. So really powerful to have him on board as we kind of help plow the field as these two roles come closer together.
Well, yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see how the security market in general shakes up this year, because we do have so many different players. And, they've been around for a while, but I think this is the year that we're really going to see roles become much more integrated and to the point where it's not even really going to be a second thought for an organization to hire and bring on managed security services providers and other managed services providers to help them with their IT operations. Because, to be honest, the beast has gotten too large to slay by yourself.
I would agree with you. And that's why the tooling complement of CrowdStrike and what we've talked about on the security side helps an MSP reduce their operational complexity. Because you can imagine if you just take the corporate world and then just move it into an MSP and say, manage it for me, it actually didn't change the experience. You just relocated the problem. And I think we have to go beyond just problem relocation to actually solve it.
Yeah, well, I look forward to seeing what happens over the course of the next year. It's going to be really interesting. But Jay, I do want to thank you for spending a little bit of time with me today and kind of outlining what you guys are thinking about. And hopefully, maybe this time next year we'll get together again and see if we were right or not.
I think we've got a bunch of touch points this year we can make happen. We've got a lot of cool things coming, and should be a real interesting year.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for your time. I do appreciate it.
It was a pleasure. Thank you, Charlene. Bye now.
All right, everybody, please stick around. We've got lots more Techstrong TV coming up, so stay tuned.
CISO Talk, to hear how real-world CISOs are dealing with today's real-world issues. From enabling secure remote workers to accelerating secure cloud adoption, defending against a pandemic of security attacks and beyond. CISO Talk covers the cyber topics you want to learn about. With your hosts, Unisys CISO Matt Newfield and MediaOps CEO Alan Schimmel, featuring a revolving panel of CISO cyber experts. This is where CISOs talk. Join us on digitalanarchist.com and techstrong.tv.
Hey everybody, happy Tuesday. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with the webinars preview. I always tell you we have so many great webinars coming up on DevOps.com, Container Journal, and Security Boulevard. So here are 3 that are happening very, very soon in the hopes that you'll be able to mark your calendar and join us. All right, the first one is called Protecting Applications Running on Kubernetes. This one is happening Tuesday, January 18th at noon Eastern on Security Boulevard. Now, it's a common misconception that you don't have to protect applications or data running on Kubernetes because they're stateless. That's not always the case, but as stateful applications in Kubernetes become more ubiquitous, having a comprehensive data protection strategy is a must. In addition to data protection, backup and recovery shouldn't be an afterthought. So this webinar delves into ways in which organizations can and should protect their Kubernetes applications. Good stuff. All right, the second one is called What's Next for DevOps? Shifting Right or Shift Right for Runtime Protection. This one is also happening Tuesday, January 18th. This one is at 3 p.m. Eastern on DevOps.com. It is sponsored by AWS and Aqua Security. Shifting Left, which is embedding security processes and output into the development pipeline, has been the focus for integrating security into DevOps for some time. But now that enterprises are approaching critical mass in moving their cloud-native applications to production, runtime protection is attracting more attention, especially from attackers. So this webinar discusses how automation for shifting security right can help with scaling cloud-native application delivery. Interesting. Some of the takeaways for the webinar include runtime security threats and why attacks are on the rise, why shifting right requires a new cloud-native security approach, a consolidated approach to shifting left and shifting right that supports sustainable risk mitigation, and finally, shifting right to enable compliance for cloud-native apps. Good stuff there. All right, the last webinar is called The Synchronization of Chaos, something I need in my household. This one is happening Thursday, January 20th at 1 p.m. Eastern on DevOps.com. It is sponsored by Gremlin. As we moved from monoliths to microservices, we've seen the benefits of decoupling services, such as increased developer velocity and more maintainable code. Service independence was also supposed to lead to more reliability, but cascading failures seem more common than ever. Why does this happen, and how can we solve it? In the field of chaos theory, there's a phenomenon wherein disparate chaotic systems will become synchronized over time when connected with each other. This is known as the synchronization of chaos. So in the session, they're going to dive into the concept of chaos theory, how synchronization of chaos applies to complex technical systems, and some best practices to avoid cascading failures and major incidents. That's going to be a really fascinating one. All right, that's it for the webinar's preview. Please check back with me on Thursday when I will have a fresh new batch for you. Until then, I hope everybody has a great day, and please, whatever you do, stay safe.
DevOps.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. DevOps.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. DevOps.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps.
All right, welcome back. Next up, and rounding out today's Techstrong TV broadcast, is a conversation with The View with Vizard. Conversation between Mike Vizard and Tim Callan, who is Chief Compliance Officer over at Sectigo. And they discuss how to defuse ticking digital certificate time bombs. Interesting topic, and as always, it's a great conversation. Let's roll it now.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Tim Callan, who's the Chief Compliance Officer for Sectigo. We're going to be talking about these digital certificates that, for some reason, continue to bite us all in the butt from time to time. So I'm going to ask Tim straight up. It is, after all, 2022, and we're still...
What's going on?
So what's up?
What's going on? So one of the things that's happened, Mike, is that the world of business has become just entirely digital. And we don't necessarily realize how vast this is, but every aspect of every business, every process is all being run by some kind of computer system. And for all of these things to work correctly and to work securely, they need to be secured by these things called digital certificates. So the variety and the number and the uses of these digital certificates have just exploded, even in the last 5 years, beyond what anyone would have imagined a few years ago. And as a consequence, management of these things has become insanely complicated. There are so many of them. They're all over the place. And all you need is one of them not to work correctly. Let's say it expires and somebody doesn't know about it, or there's a configuration problem, or it doesn't get deployed correctly, and it can take down whole systems. And we see this in the headlines over and over and over again. It affects major tech companies. It affects major global brands. It is just an ongoing difficulty that IT departments face.
We have lifecycle management tools for everything under the sun. And I would imagine that certificates are no different. And yet it seems like we have a hard time putting together a process to manage all this stuff. So where do we fall down?
I think so. There's a pretty new emerging category that's getting a lot of attention right now that people call certificate lifecycle management. And it is for exactly that reason. Again, one of the things to remember is it wasn't that long ago when things were still fairly simple. I may have had, again, go back in time 5 years. I probably had a server room. There was a discrete number of servers. I knew how many there were. I could count them. There were 126. I put these certificates on them that lasted for 3 years. And in this scenario, I've got to deal with 42 certificates a year. Not so bad. Right? I can do that. And under those circumstances, it was true. So you set up a spreadsheet, and you give yourself some alerts, and you're, oh, that one's coming in 30 days. Make a note to myself, put it on my whiteboard, go deal with it. But now it's just not the case. Like even reasonably small companies can have hundreds or thousands of these things floating around. Large companies can have millions. And so that doesn't work anymore. And this is a new development. And so, IT professionals who cut their teeth 5 years ago or 10 years ago, they're still young people. They don't have a lot of gray hair, but they have to do things in an entirely different way. And that's what's happening. The industry's just been, I think, the pace of change has outpaced IT professionals' processes. And what we're trying to do now is catch up.
It also feels like there's a disconnect between the people who create the certificate and the folks who are left to manage it. And a lot of times those people leave and nobody writes down anything. And the next thing you know, somebody wakes up one morning and the website's down because the certificate wasn't renewed.
We call them rogue certificates. And that's exactly right. What you described is exactly what happens. Imagine this scenario. It's a shadow IT scenario, right? Somebody in some line of business wants to do something because it's going to make their business run better. And they've got a certain amount of budget and they hire some firm, and the firm comes in and they do a good job and they put it all together and the system's running really well and something's happening. Some critical customer service function is going on correctly and it's all going great. And what nobody realized is that 12 months ago, somebody who doesn't even work for my company got some certificates from somewhere and put them on a server somewhere, and all certificates expire. They must. That's the nature of them. And that means that every single certificate is a ticking time bomb that one day is going to blow up. And if nobody knows about these time bombs, then you find out that they blew up when things stop working. And again, this is so much of what happens. And so part of what we think is important is that a certificate lifecycle management solution, a CLM, must have a discovery function so that you can go out and you can find these certificates before you find them the hard way and bring them under management, see when they're expiring, ensure that they're compliant with your rules, ensure that they're secure, ensure that they meet that requirements that you have from, let's say, the government or SLAs or other customer requirements are all met, and you do that before you have a problem.
One of the things we've seen in the last 2 years is this massive wave of digital business transformation. Do you think that these so-called ticking time bombs are going to go off in major ways in the next year or two when certificates expire?
This has been going on. I mean, this has been a story. This story is far from over. Let me share real quickly the story of Tim's digital haircut. So the last time I got a haircut, this is a human being holding a scissors, moving around your head, right? The most offline thing in the world. Let's talk about this experience. I go to the website. I put in my street address. I see nearby stores and available appointments. I click on one. I say, give me that. Then at that point, a countdown starts on my browser. 37 minutes to your haircut, 36 minutes to your haircut. 15 minutes before my haircut, my phone buzzes with a text. It says 15 minutes to your haircut. Click here for directions. I drive down there. I walk in. My name is on a screen. I say, I'm that guy. They say, have a seat. I sit down in the chair. A person looks at a tablet, says 2 inches on top and 1 on the sides. I say, that's right. And someone I've never met before gives me a perfect haircut. Now, every step of that process is digitally enabled. Every step of that process has servers and systems and software, and all of that stuff is interwoven. And all of that stuff has to function, or that experience does not go off correctly. And that's the world we live in. And so what you're talking about, anywhere in that life cycle, there's a certificate that somebody doesn't know about. It doesn't work correctly. Now that bit of software, that bit of the system doesn't work. Now there's things that depend on that. Well, guess what? Those things stop working. And there's things that depend on that, and those things stop working. And it cascades outwards. And this is why we can see things like, you might remember a few years ago early in 2018, I believe it was, the O2, the major British phone service, was out for a whole day. 40 million people didn't have phone coverage. That whole outage owed itself to one expired certificate. Mm-hmm. And so that's how these things happen.
We're also seeing the shift to the edge as part of these digital business transformation initiatives, and there's a lot more dependencies. How do I manage that when that edge may be somewhere where I physically am not going to be able to get to, or I might have sent somebody there a year ago, but I don't have anybody to go there now. So how do I automate this?
For sure. I mean, that's another big part of this is, again, this old day of there's a server room and I own the servers and I can touch them with my hand and see that the red light is on is just behind us now, right? You might be running things in public cloud. You might be repatriating them between different clouds and in-premise and bringing them in and bring them out. And things might be connecting to each other that are in very different physical locations, in very different operating systems and environments, and they just depend on each other and they all work, right? I mean, there's a hot topic now is robotic process automation, which is I'm going to build a little robot and it's going to, excuse me, it's going to navigate through all of my complex systems doing things, taking actions. And that means they're moving from place to place to place to place. And so it's really important that you can handle the full scope and variety of the kinds of certificates that are used because they're not all the same. Right. And the certificate that I put on my traditional bare iron server is different from the certificate that I use in a public cloud environment. It's different from the certificate that I use in a DevOps environment. And that's different from what I put on your client machine to authenticate you. So all of those things, they're different types, they're different configurations, they're different terms, they're different rules. And they all need to be used correctly because any one of them failing can create the kinds of problems that we talked about before. So we like to use the word certificate agnostic, which means to say, the phrase certificate agnostic doesn't really matter where it came from, doesn't matter what it looks like, doesn't matter how it's configured. As long as it's a certificate and it's legal, you need to be able to discover it, manage it, and renew it all in a single place.
When you look down the road a little bit, how simple can this get? I mean, in my mind, I think what I want to have happen is I want a message that says, hello, politely idiot. You have a certificate that's about to expire, and I want to be able to click a button and remediate that whole issue and move on. So are we there yet?
Absolutely. Or you want to be able to decide, oh, you know what, this is a sunsetted use case. We're not using the system anymore, so don't renew it because I don't want to spend my money there, right? Or you want to be able to say these following things, I want to set these in advance. I know they're not expiring for 4 months, but I know perfectly well I'm going to need them. So I just automate the renewal when the time comes and don't even worry about it. By the way, I want a report. I want to be able to do a search or get a dashboard or things along those lines. And yes, absolutely get an alert. Hey, warning, the following thing is going to happen. It's bad. Prevent it from happening. Yes. So the answer to that is, unfortunately, it very much depends. Some systems are fully automatable. They take advantage of protocols like Acme, or they have good, strong agents where you can say, I'm going to go from beginning to end. I'm going to get my certificate from my public provider or my own personal private CA. It's going to go all the way down to sitting on a machine and no human ever needs to intervene. And oftentimes that's the case, but not always. There's a lot of operating systems in the world. There's a lot of environments in the world. And sometimes that last mile provisioning can't quite get there, in which case you can still get things like get the certificate, provision it, make it available to me, make sure it's compliant, everything is there, but I have to go do the install. And part of what I think operating system vendors and CLM vendors and various people like that are trying to do is close those gaps on that last mile. Because you're right. What we all want ultimately is to be able to allow machines to do 100% of this work for us. There's no reason why humans should have to do this work. There's a lot of great things that people can do that require intelligence and knowledge. This is one of the things that machines can take off their plates. And as much as possible, we want to do that.
Do you think that this is kind of something that can be part of a DevOps workflow, but people just forget about it?
Yeah, or what happens is there's some kind of de facto that's in place, right? So depending on your orchestration platform, it may have some kind of built-in basic PKI that it comes with. Now, that doesn't mean that anybody audited it, vetted it. It doesn't mean that it's compliant with your requirements. It doesn't mean that it means your SLAs or your industry compliance requirements or anything along those lines. But it does mean that it issues certificates and the certificates run and everything happens and there's no failure. And so oftentimes we find people just using this. This is another version of rogue certificates. We could almost call it a rogue CA. They're using a rogue CA and they don't know it. And they don't know what it does. And they don't know how it works. And they don't know how it might get them in trouble. So we see that a lot. Or in the concept of a rogue CA, it's kind of what you said, what we said before. Even in the event that it wasn't built into my orchestration platform, it's easy enough that the person who was originally setting it up, who may not be a PKI expert, who may not be responsible for maintenance of these certificates in the long term, took that and plugged it in and got on with their life, right? And they got through release, it passed QA, it went out in the world, they were happy, they moved on to something else. And that still doesn't mean that anybody's minding the store. So again, that's another real need. A few years ago, we weren't doing much DevOps. We weren't that worried about it, but now we are. And it's something where, again, IT professionals, I think, need to get current with a lot of what's happening today.
What about the compliance folks? We hear a lot about compliance as code these days. Is that becoming part of this conversation as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, once upon a time, certificates were kind of under the radar. Nobody was looking at them. But there's a lot of ways that the industry, that people have gotten in trouble because of bad certificates. There are weak keys. There are weak hashing algorithms that may not, people might still be using SHA-1. SHA-1 is not secure. Like, you can't use it anymore. You just can't. And by the way, that's soon going to happen to our encryption algorithms. So our major encryption algorithms are called RSA and ECC. Quantum computers are going to blow those up. And we're going to need new encryption algorithms because those will be very, very breakable in the foreseeable future. And so under those circumstances, we no longer can have this attitude of saying, well, certificates kind of don't count. Nobody worries about certificates. And so you're seeing more focus on compliance. You're seeing like customers building that into contracts and agreements and RFPs. You're seeing governments or other governing entities putting requirements around things like making sure that PKI and encryption meet certain minimum standards. And where once upon a time, you as a CIO may have been able to say, whatever, probably not safe to do that anymore.
All right. So what's your best advice to deal with the cultural issues here? Because we do have IT teams involved, security teams are involved, compliance teams can be involved. So how do I bring all these rather different worlds together?
Yeah, and shadow IT is heavily involved, as we've talked about, right? Because all kinds of people are off making things that don't have any kind of IT background, and so that's a huge one. Yeah, we think one of the great things about certificate lifecycle management is it does give the CIO or the CISO the chance to take it all back. Right? If I have a system that does discovery and I can find these certificates, I can reach out to the individuals involved and say, hey, you've got a bunch of certificates running on these following systems. I'm going to take over management of those and I'm going to put them into my management console. And when you do that, there's a bunch of benefits that happen. You prevent, you mitigate the opportunity for an outage or a breach. You mitigate the opportunity for a compliance problem. You get more control and visibility on what you're doing. You know what vendors you have in-house, and you get more visibility on the systems that are running. And all of these things are very, very valuable. So, the great thing is this is something that really can be driven by that owner, that CIO's office or CISO's office. And people pretty much go along with it. Certificates are a hassle, right? Nobody wants to manage them, and nobody wants to worry about the possibility that one day that time bomb blows them up. And so to the degree that worry can be taken away, what we see when we talk to enterprises is that it's pretty easy to get people on board with the idea of not being responsible for worrying about these things.
All right. Well, you heard it here first, folks. There's a certificate somewhere in your organization that's about to cause you a problem in 2022. Probably for it now. Hey, Tim, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Back to you guys in the studio.
Finding great DevOps and cyber talent is a huge challenge for technical teams. Cloud transformation is driving demand higher. You've tried doing it yourself. Job boards, LinkedIn, didn't work. Recruiters are an option, but who do you trust and not waste your time and money? Recruit Ops is the new way to source engineering talent. From Media Ops, the people behind DevOps.com, Security Boulevard, Container Journal, and more. We sit right in the middle of the hottest positions in Dev, Sec, and Ops, and the brightest minds in the field. If you're looking for a great position or the talent to fill it, we can help you. Trust us, risk-free.
All right. I hope you enjoyed today's Techstrong TV broadcast. We had an outstanding lineup of conversations on today's show. Hope you were able to check them all out. If you can't, you can always go to digitalanarchist.com and check them out there. Before we close out today's show, do want to remind you that we do have a wonderful, I'm very excited about this upcoming virtual event called Predict 2022. This is an annual virtual conference that we do. Hopefully, maybe one day we'll be able to do it live, but until then, it's a 2-day event we'll be doing January 19th and 20th. And this is our annual kind of a look into the future, what's ahead for the year and beyond in the areas of DevOps, application development, cloud native, cybersecurity, containers, Kubernetes, you name it, we cover it. So we have so many great people lined up for this year's event. We have a keynote that is being moderated by our own Alan Schimmel, and it features Emmett Keefe and Thomas Crane from Insight Partners. They're going to be talking about the new wave of technologies. We also have just a lineup, a star-studded lineup of speakers, including some very smart people, such as Carrie Perlson, who is with MIT. She's the CAMS Research Consortium. Russ Finney, who is with the University of Texas at Austin McCombs School of Business, and Matthew Guarini, who is with Forrester Research. We also have Tracy Bannon from MITRE Corporation, Chris Hughes from Acquia. We have our own Mike Jones from the Haunted Hacker podcast, and his kind of cohort, Donovan Farrow, who is the Unmasked Hacker. Those two guys and myself actually do a session on the top 5 security threats for 2022, and that's a great conversation. I'm so very excited about this entire event. I hope you can join us. You can go to to techstrongevents.com, got ahead of myself there, and just click on the Predict banner there, and you'll be able to check out the agenda, the lineup of speakers, and register for the event. So I hope to see you there, but until then, hope to see you here on Thursday for another Techstrong TV broadcast. Until then, I hope everybody has a great day, and please, whatever you do, stay safe.